On May 12th, 1888, at the University of Yale, young track star Charles Sherrill does something many have never seen before. He crouches down and puts his hands on the ground before the start of his track race, perhaps being the first time anyone has ever done a crouching start, creating an innovative way to start a race in track and field that now is done around the world. Here's the story about how all this happened, and maybe he wasn't the first. Today on Daily Sports History. All right, before we hit the field on today's episode, let's huddle up and talk about Sports Social Pro. If you manage your team's sports social media and feel like it's coaching a team of cats, we got the perfect solution. Whether you need a playbook for DIY success or you want us to handle all your social media and make it into MVPs, head over to Daily Sports History / Welcome to Daily Sports History. I'm Ethan Reese, your guide to a rapid deep dive into sports history every day. Now, running has been around forever. It was featured in the very first Olympics and arguably could be called the very first sport, where all you needed was two people to run against each other. So there's not an exact date to when running started, but many attribute the basic beginning of the sport to 1776 BCE in ancient Greece, in the town of Olympia, where they held the very first Olympics, holding the first official competition-like race for the Olympics. Now, running actually happened before then, but they had the first racing event. Then in 490 BC, a Greek soldier named Pheidippides was commissioned to leave the town of Marathon, going towards Athens, to report the victory over Persia, roughly 25 miles away. And this is where they got the name for the marathon, which again came back in the first modern Olympics in 1896. But they didn't only run long distances, because back in the 1870s they started to run the 100-yard dash. And I said yard, not meter, as in America we ran the 100-yard dash, and in other parts of the world they ran the meter dash, including in the Olympics. So oftentimes you will see, back before meters became consistent in the 70s, overall track and field, you'll see some 100-yard dash times. And usually whoever runs the fastest sprinting time of either the 100-yard, as previously was done, or the 100-meter was known as the fastest man or woman in the world. Now, Charles Sherrill would go on to become an ambassador for the United States, but back in 1877, he was actually a freshman at Yale, where he took the running world by storm when he won the 100-yard Intercollegiate Association of Amateur Athletes of America. It's a mouthful. They shortened it to AC4, which was a precursor to the NCAA. And later that year, he would go on to win the 100-yard at the National Association of Amateur Athletes of America, the NAAA, which again, before the NCAA. You get all of these different kinds of tournaments. So already in his freshman year, he was one of the best sprinters in all of America. Then in his sophomore year, he ended up trying out something new, as in those days, every race began with athletes standing up and leaning kind of in a lunge formation before the race started to start the race. No one ever crouched down, and there was no racing blocks. And Charles and his coach, Mike Murphy, worked on a new stance, starting from a crouching position. He would have his hands right at the beginning line, both in the dirt, because at this time they were still running on dirt tracks. He would put his hands down with his knee also down on one end and his other leg a little forward with his foot on the balls of his feet, mimicking a crouch-like position similar to what we see today, but a very simplistic version. And they would unveil this style at the Rockaway Hunting Club Games, where he was racing off against runners from Columbia, Princeton, and Harvard. And many thought, including journalists who were covering this event, that Charles had actually fallen and started from that position. But no, this was a planned start. And even the other runners were confused by what he was doing, but he took off, passing them right away and one-handedly with a time of 10.5 seconds. And he did the same thing for the 200, where he ran a time of 22.66 seconds. And he continued this through all the races for the rest of his career. And on June 15th, 1888, he set 2 separate American records for both the 250-yard dash, where he ran 25.88 seconds, and also won the 125-yard dash with a time of 12.66 seconds, and would later also set the record for the 150-yard dash with 15 seconds. And he would attempt to win the Amateur Athletic Union Championship, which was known as the National Championship at the time, but he finished second in the 100-yard dash and would go on to injure a tendon in his leg and not be able to finish the rest of the races. But 3 days later, talk of this stance had started, and the first crouching start seen in Britain took place at the South London Harris promotion at the Oval Cricket Gardens by Thomas Nichols, where he also won his 100-yard race. And by the time Charles was done, he had retired from athletics after college. He had set the record. He had the second fastest 100-yard dash time ever, and the record in the world for both the 50-yard dash and the 250-yard dash. Now, after his running career, he did not get out of athletics, as he was a part of the International Olympic Committee and was vital in bringing the Olympics to Los Angeles in 1932. And he was also looked to help America be featured in the 1936 Summer Olympics in Berlin, and met with Hitler multiple times to assure that the American athletes would be okay to run in the event. And this became one of the most important Olympics ever, as this is when Jesse Owens took the stage and arguably changed the world with those Olympics. But that's for another day. Well, what's important to remember is, now there were some controversies on who actually was the first one to do a crouching start. Now, Charles was the first one to be photographed doing it, but Bobby McDonald, a celebrated Australian runner, states that he had done the crouching stance years earlier, trying to mimic what he had seen kangaroos do for their starts. But he had never been photographed before Charles, and at this time, people were figuring out things around the same time, so who actually did it first is never really known. But we do have a picture from Charles running this way, and that's why Charles is given the distinction of the first one, though he may have not been the first, as it's possible others had done this years and years before, as running has been around for thousands of years. But the important thing to remember is, no matter if anything has been done before, it doesn't mean that's how it has to be. We have made innovations in sports all over the place in different avenues of life. In those changes, someone had to be the first. So don't be afraid to try something new. I'm trying something new every day by putting this podcast together, because I'm not a good speaker, and I had to go to speech my entire childhood to become a better speaker myself. But trying new things is what can break you out and let you set records. And I want to thank you for listening to today's episode. And if you like this, please hit that share button wherever you're listening and send it to someone else that loves sports history just as much as you, so they can join in our sports history community and come back tomorrow for more daily sports history.